Hey, Alex here from Black Sheep IT Consulting. Welcome to the third and final part of our revisit to a very old topic on Siebel Hub, CSV data import in Siebel CRM. One attempt, one potential solution. Make sure you check out the links in the description, especially if you haven't seen the first and second part of this. It's important that you watch this first. The third part deals with the feedback loop. So the user now, as we have seen, and we'll just see in the demo in a few moments, the user gets feedback when the file is actually loaded. So there is a progress bar, but when the file has finished loading, there could be a multitude of success or error messages depending on what you imported. So we are leveraging here the status objects that EAI Siebel adapter passes back. In the first part, we understand that the EAI Siebel adapter is used for upserting the records using an integration object. And in the integration components, you can specify a status key. And that will result in a status object being returned if you request it. So the status object is a Siebel message, and you can display it maybe in that format that you see in the screen right now. We will use a slightly different format, slightly easier, but you can do whatever you want with that information, and we will learn how to, well, be still in the browser in JavaScript and get it back and display it to the user, where it's of course, the user wants to know, I uploaded a bunch of records, what happened to each individual record? So again, make sure to watch the first and second part, and let's jump right into a demo first, and then let's see how we implemented it. So for the demo, I'm logged in into my demo environment. Again, it's a slightly different environment. It has a custom style sheet, and I have my custom button in the toolbar, which pops up my custom copy of a standard pop-up applet, which is manipulated already by a post-load observer, let's call it. Watch part 2 for this. And I can choose a file, a CSV file, which imports contacts, and import that, and will be imported right away. 36 records. OK. And you notice when I click OK, I get immediate display of a status object that says all 37 or so, 36, 37, so I can't remember, records have been updated. So they have already been imported. So let's just try this again. I have the import file here. And let's change the last names of those contacts. Again, if you watch the first part and second part, you understand that these are specific files for the Read CSV service, which requires a marketing license and uses integration objects. But you can use a similar approach with custom business services. Create a Siebel message out of the information, pass it on to EAI Siebel adapter, which uses that integration object to upsert the information. So let's just briefly make sure we have unique names. So let's just say that would be GHT, and we replace that. So now we have new names, and let's make the second name an existing one, XYZ, and the one here is actually the middle name. So let's update this. Okay. So we expect lots of inserts and one update here with that record set. I saved it. Now let's import it. And that's 36 records. Okay, and here's the feedback. So that was actually inserted, probably because the key is here, but I got all inserts. So let's try one more time. This time with the not sure how to achieve an update here, because that's all key fields. let's check out the keys, right? Must be some keys. So integration object, the integration object used is sample contact SIA. And what keys does it use for contact? A lot of them actually. Let's check out the first one. Okay, first name, last name, middle name, person. Okay, so that are all key fields in my example set. So I'm not able to do a real update. But in any case, we have seen that the operation comes back, the status object comes back, and that status object is another key. The fields in the status object are defined by a status key type. So we have first name, last name, and operation, which is the system field of EI Siebel adapter, indicating the operation that happened. In our case, insert or update, because we're running upsert. So before we look at the JavaScript code that pops up all this information, that is the status object information and the alert at the end, how do we actually capture information? Because the grunt work of the import is done on the Siebel server, not in the browser, of course. So behind the scenes, in the first part, you have seen that there is a workflow process invoked by a wrapper business service, invoked by the import button on the pop-up applet. And that import process, just opening right now, is probably more complex than you think. So we have discussed in the first video that you need at least a read CSV service and EI Siebel adapter. Instead of read CSV service, you can use any custom business service capable of taking in the information you upload as a file, read it from a file, and convert it to a Siebel message that is suitable for consumption by EI Siebel adapter. Again, what you're licensing here. You notice that there are 3 additional steps, setting profile attributes. And these profile attributes are, of course, important for consummation by the browser script. Profile attributes can be read quite easily in JavaScript. So let's check out those profile attribute steps. As I open the properties window, so I use the session access service. It has a set profile attribute function. There are probably more than one business services in standard Siebel that can set profile attributes. Just do a flat search for the business service method. Or you can also roll your own, of course, if you're not sure about licensing. It's better to roll your own business service. Straightforward setting a profile attribute so it gets the name of a profile attribute and the value. And you see that the name here, the first one is Black Sheep Import 1. And the actual value is a JSON string. So doing something different here. So we concatenating a future JSON object with the process instance ID. We can grab that from, the workflow process itself. It's a standard property, and we take the file name input, that's the file path on the server, and the file type. That's the first information we have, even before we need to read the CSV file. The second set profile attribute step uses the same business service, sets Black Sheep Import 2, because now we can use the output of read CSV. For example, we display or we store more or less in a JSON string the record count, because that's what the business service returns, how many records have been processed. And as you can imagine, the third step is also saving a profile attribute. In that case, it's called Black Sheep Import SO for status object. And we're passing in the status object, which is hierarchical, but funny enough, it results in something that we can use. It's actually a property set. So we have already run an import. So these profile attributes should be populated and we should be able to grab them from the browser. So Siebel app s_app get profile attribute. Already ran this before. Let's get that first one. And yeah, you can see it's a string process instance ID. That was the last instance basically that run. If we run a new one, that gets overwritten. And the temporary file path on the Siebel server. And let's read number 2. That's the record count. And let's read the SO one, which is, oh yes, a string encoded property set. So the fun fact here is you pass in a property set, a hierarchical process property, and it gets encoded right away. So very cool, because you can decode that in JavaScript in the browser. Or of course you can decode it on the server as well. It's a real property set. That's the whole status object returned from EAI Siebel adapter. So we have these 3 property sets and a lot of other information. So now we can put this to good use and display it to the user. But first we need to handle events. So the standard behavior when the import finishes is the dialog just closes and no feedback is given. So of course we want to change that. And the answer, how do we change that, is in that enhance pop-up applet function in our observer post load handler that we have conceived in part 2. So we establish a dialog close event handler on the pop-up dialog, and we get the profile 2 in this case, which is the one with the record count. Needs a little bit of massaging here before we can really parse it. That's because of the double quotes and so forth. But we can eventually parse it and read the count. Of course, it's a little bit convoluted because it doesn't need to be a JSON string if you just want to transport a number. But in any case. So now we have the count, and we can compile a file info information. So we have already the BCRM file name in the presentation model property. We have the file size. That's what the browser reads. And now we can add the record count. So file info will read file so-and-so, size so-and-so, record count so-and-so many. And we remember that BCRM error we set. So basically that is set when we start the import. So nothing went wrong so far. We can display an alert. Notice we're not using alert here. We're using Siebel app.utils alert, makes it testable with test automation. And we say import completed successfully. And here's the file info. So that's the pop-up you see when something went okay. And we have just so far seen the okay part. We also have to test for failure, of course. And we also can show the status object. So I've written a function here to get that status object. It's right here. That gets the 3rd profile attribute with the status object. Remember, it's a string encoded property set. So I can create an empty property set and then use decode from string, a very cool Open UI function, to actually make that a real property set, which I can now parse with Siebel property set functions, such as getChild. There's an isValid flag, which is true right now. There's my output object, empty array, and I have the property count, how many properties, and if there are no properties, it's probably not okay, so the semaphore is set to false. I also have a counter, get the child count, so that's the number of records. And if everything's okay, we can start iterating the child array and create an empty object first and then fill it with the properties. That's the field names and values, and then push it into the array. So the output here is an array of records that have been inserted with that status key information. So that's the array, and that's returned by this function. So now we have the status object array, and that is an array. I have a custom function to convert that into HTML. You not quite difficult to understand. Here's the function. Basically takes the array, treats it like a Siebel record set, creates a table header, creates a table body, and creates the table rows for each one, and returns that as a jQuery object. So that's a HTML table. That is the outcome here. So I just create a wrapper div and append that HTML table, some custom CSS here to have an overflow scroll bar eventually, and now just pop it up as a dialog. That's all that happens. So we again get the profile attribute, which is a property set, convert it into an array of objects, which you can convert into an HTML table, and then display that HTML table. It's no rocket science here. You can use, of course, more rocket science-y libraries to make that even snappier. But it's a good start to show how to use the output of the workflow of EI Siebel Adapter in a profile attribute and then display to the user. That's when everything went okay. Else is basically when BCRM error is not false. So we have an error, and so we display import failed. We also want to understand how to set that error flag. And to do that, we need to identify something went wrong on the server. Now that is, of course, a hard task if you are alone in the browser with your JavaScript, but you're not alone. You have the Open UI API, and that has a very cool attach post proxy execute binding function. Yes, that's the full name. It's a PM function. It's documented in the Open UI guide. So you hook up on an existing method, like import. That's the method invoked by the import button. You have a callback function which receives the method name and, most importantly, the input and output property set. And the output property set is what we're really looking for, because that's the output from the server. So the post proxy means literally after the proxy has processed the results from the server. And if that output property set contains a child of type errors, you're in trouble. And so first thing we do, we set the BCRM error property on the presentation model. Remember, it's getting picked up here in the else branch. And we get the error text out of the output property set. Remove the progress bar because we're done with that. And create an error message, literally. So it says, well, it's a span, and it says, okay, this is the decoded error text, and upload another file and try again. So the dialog is still displayed in this at this moment, and show that error text to the user. So we haven't seen an example for this, so let's check out what happens when we upload, let's say, an invalid file. So we start the import. And this time I choose, well, let's use this XML file. It's sure invalid, can't be processed. And click import. Well, that's from the framework. I have not found a way to suppress it unless you create a custom error handler in Siebel Open UI, which I haven't. So this is definitely an error message. And see what happens when I click OK. The error message gets picked up by the post proxy and is displayed here along with upload another file and try again. So I can, of course, close the dialog here. And yeah, it still says import failed when I close the dialog. So that's a nice touch here. So let's see that code in action. So I put a breakpoint on the dialog close, and let's also put a breakpoint on in the post proxy. Let's put it here, so in case we have an error. So let's try one more time. Let's try the two test cases, success test case and the fail test case. So first the success case. And you can see the standard framework just closes the dialog on success. So now we are in the dialog close event handler. We get the profile attribute. We have the record count. Well, it's a bit of a worry here to get that count actually, but eventually we make it. Could be easier here. We compile that file info. So file info now says file name, size, and record count. The get error is false because it's not been set to true. So we jump right in here. We display the alert. Set the breakpoint, and once we click OK, we get back, and now we can get the status object. So this is what it looks like after conversion from the property set. It's an array of records, very much like a record set in Siebel looks like. I like this format. We convert it to an HTML table. So that's, you can't see it here, but it's literally a div with a table in it. And now becomes a dialog. And there's the information about the entire status object, every record in it. And of course, every record displays the operation or failure, what happened, what went wrong. Okay, that was the success case. So now let's do the failure case. So let's upload a wrong file. Click import. We get an error message from the framework. I have to acknowledge that. And now you can see we are in the post proxy execute binding. So that is still processing the import method. And we see the input property set. That's also interesting, what Siebel has passed in over the proxy. And the output property set includes, well, it already says error here, but it has a child array. It has an errors child. And this has another child which has the error message that we want to display to the user. The user has already seen it, but just imagine you're suppressing the error display. You have a custom error handler. So now we're setting the error property, the semaphore, to true in the presentation model. And let's just do a breakpoint in the else branch here. So now we remove the progress bar, we create the error message, and we display the error message to the user. So the dialog remains open in this case. So that's fine. And if the user closes the dialog, the close handler still kicks in, as we can see. And this time, because the BCRM error presentation model property is true, it jumps right here to display the summary import failed. And there you have it. Okay, so that's the end of a three-part journey, importing CSV files. One possible option with a lot of presumptions we're making about which business services you're using, etc. So you might find your own mileage here. Again, check out the links in the description, especially if you haven't seen part 1 or 2. Watch them in sequence. And also make sure to look up the articles on the Siebel Hub, which might well be more up to date at the time you read them, because I will update them with the links to this video. So there's part 1, all the repository portions. There's part 2, Pimp My Dialog. And there's part 3, display additional information, especially the status object. So I hope this was useful information, learning how to use Siebel Open UI. Check out The link's in the description. I already said that. Make sure you like and subscribe and whatnot. Thanks for watching. Take care and bye-bye.